Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Shane. This is my first time posting, and honestly, I never thought I'd be here sharing something like this. My life was comfortable, I guess. I had a wife, Kay, who I thought I could trust with my life. We had two boys, James 10 and Dylan 7, and I thought we were this happy regular family. I'd worked hard to build a stable life for us, sacrificing my own dreams here and there to ensure we had everything we needed. If you'd asked me last year, I'd have said I was one of the lucky ones. Kay and I met in college. She was this bright, confident woman who knew what she wanted. I admired that about her. While I was more reserved and focused on getting my degree, she was the life of every party we went to. Even then, I didn't think she'd notice a guy like me, but she did, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. At least, I thought so. Fast forward 12 years, and there we were, married with two boys, a house, and a life that felt settled. But here's the thing, looking back now, I can see the cracks I chose to ignore. Little things, you know? Kay's phone always face down, how she started working late more often, or the way she'd brush me off when I asked how her day was. It didn't seem like much at the time, but I guess hindsight is always 20/20ths. I'll never forget the day it all started to unravel. It was a Saturday. I'd taken the boys out for breakfast, just the three of us. We did that sometimes to give Kay a break, or at least that's what I thought. When we got home, Kay was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, smiled, and asked how breakfast was. It was such a normal moment that I didn't think much of it. But then James asked, "Mom, who was the man here earlier?" I froze. Kay's face didn't change much, just this slight twitch in her smile. "Oh honey," she said, ruffling his hair, "it was just the mailman. He dropped off a package." James tilted his head like he wasn't buying it. But he came inside. That's when I felt it, the first crack. Something about her tone when she brushed it off felt wrong, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I mean, why wouldn't I trust her? I should have trusted my gut. That night, I couldn't get James's words out of my head. Who was the man here earlier? It played on repeat. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about Kay's reaction stuck with me. She was calm, too calm, like she'd practiced the explanation. I decided to let it go, at least for the night. I told myself that I was overthinking things, that I had no reason not to trust her. But a voice in the back of my head kept whispering, "What if you're wrong?" The next morning, I casually mentioned the package over breakfast. "What did the mailman drop off yesterday?" I asked. Kay barely looked up from her coffee. "Oh, just some work stuff," she said. "I ordered a new headset for the office." "Cool. Can I see it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, then smiled. "I left it at work. Figured I'd just take it straight there." That tiny pause before she answered? That was the crack widening. I didn't press further, but my mind was racing. Later that week, I came home early from work. I'd told Kay I had a late meeting, but it was canceled last minute. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a car parked across the street. It wasn't familiar, a black sedan with tinted windows. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was a neighbor's guest. I walked into the house and called out, "Hey, I'm home." The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual. Kay often took the boys to the park after school. But then I heard it, a soft thud from upstairs, like someone was moving around. My heart started pounding. "Kay." I called again, louder this time. Footsteps. Quick, almost panicked. I rushed up the stairs, my adrenaline spiking. By the time I got to our bedroom, the door was half open. Kay was there, standing by the window, looking out. She jumped when she saw me. "Shane, you scared me," she said, clutching her chest like she'd seen a ghost. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. "Just putting away laundry," she said, motioning to a pile of clothes on the bed. But her voice was shaky. And her phone was sitting on the nightstand, screen lit up with a text from a name I didn't recognize, Greg. I didn't say anything about it. Not then. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Okay," before walking out of the room. But inside, I was spiraling. That night, when she fell asleep, I grabbed her phone. I know it's a breach of trust, but something in me needed answers. Her phone was locked, and I didn't know the code. That's when it hit me. How long had it been locked? We used to know each other's passcodes. I didn't even know when that had changed. I put the phone back and stared at the ceiling for hours. I wanted to believe her, but everything felt wrong. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed to know what was going on. So when Kay left for her job, I followed her. I felt ridiculous, like some paranoid idiot. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining things. She didn't go to work. She drove across town to a small cafe, parked in the lot, and went inside. A few minutes later, a man joined her, a tall guy in his late 30s with dark hair and a confident stride. They hugged before sitting down together. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in, demand an explanation, but I didn't. Instead, I took a picture of them through the window and drove away. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had more answers. That night, I started digging. I went through her laptop when she was in the shower, and that's when I found it, an email thread between her and Greg. The messages were flirty at first, then explicit. They talked about meeting up, about things they'd done together. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shane doesn't suspect a thing. I'll handle it. Don't worry. Handle what? I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, feeling like my whole world was collapsing. I didn't know how deep this went, but one thing was clear: the life I thought I had was a lie. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to make sense of what I'd found. The email thread replayed in my mind on a loop, especially that one line: Shane doesn't suspect a thing. I'll handle it. Handle what? My marriage? My boys? Me? I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more information. So I played the part, laughing at her jokes, helping with dinner, tucking the boys in at night. All the while, my mind raced. Who was this woman I'd married? The following Saturday, I told Kay I needed to work on the car and asked her to take the boys to her sister's for the day. Once she left, I started digging deeper. I went through her emails, her bank statements, and even the location history on her phone. It was all there, plain as day: hotel charges, unexplained withdrawals, and a pattern of her meeting Greg almost every week. But that wasn't the worst part. As I scrolled through her emails, I stumbled on a document titled Trust and Will Agreement. At first, I thought it was the paperwork we drafted years ago when the boys were born. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't our will. It was hers. And the beneficiaries? Greg. And my boys. I scanned the document, my hands trembling. It detailed everything she owned, including things that should have been jointly ours, and how it would all transfer to Greg in the event of her death. Or mine. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. Was she planning to get rid of me? Was Greg in on it too? I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, but everything about this screamed premeditated. I needed help. I called my best friend, Jason, and told him everything. He's the kind of guy who's always calm, no matter the situation, but even he was speechless. Shane, he said finally, you can't stay in that house. Not until you know what's going on. But the boys. Take them with you if you have to. But this isn't normal, man. She's not just cheating. This is something else. That night, I acted like everything was fine. I kissed Kay goodnight, tucked the boys in, and went to bed. But as soon as she was asleep, I packed a bag and called Jason. He lived a few towns over and said I could crash there while I figured things out. At 2 a.m., I slipped out of the house, taking only the essentials and leaving a note on the counter that read, "We need to talk." I didn't want her to know where I was. Not yet. The next morning, Jason and I went to the police. I showed them the emails and the will, explaining my suspicions. They were skeptical at first. Cheating spouses aren't exactly uncommon, but when I mentioned the life insurance policies we'd taken out years ago, they started taking me seriously. One officer, Detective Hayes, asked if I'd be willing to let them monitor her communications. I agreed. At this point, I'd do anything to protect myself and my boys. Over the next week, the police uncovered more than I could have imagined. They found text messages between Kay and Greg, not just about their affair, but about me. They joked about how clueless I was, how everything was going according to plan. And then there was one message that changed everything. Once it's done, we'll finally be free. Just stick to the timeline. That's when I realized I wasn't paranoid. They weren't just cheating, they were planning something. Something dangerous. And I had no intention of waiting around to find out what. After the police discovered the messages, everything became a blur of fear and urgency. Detective Hayes sat me down and laid it all out. They suspected Kay and Greg were planning to cash in on my life insurance. The timing of the messages and the details in her will lined up too perfectly. "Shane," Hayes said, "we believe your life could be in danger. You need to stay out of the house." Hearing those words hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal anymore. This was my life, and the lives of my boys, on the line. I stayed with Jason, avoiding contact with Kay. The police advised me not to confront her until they had enough evidence. They assured me they were monitoring her closely, but waiting was unbearable. Every minute felt like an eternity, and the thought of her plotting behind my back made my skin crawl. Kay, of course, was blowing up my phone. She left messages saying she was worried sick and didn't understand why I'd left. The more she called, the more it felt like she was trying to cover her tracks. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the boys. Jason and his wife, Emma, were incredible, keeping them entertained while I worked with the police. I didn't tell the boys much, just that I needed some time to sort out grown-up stuff. James seemed to sense something was wrong, but he didn't press. One evening, I received an email from Kay. The subject line read, "Please let's talk." Against my better judgment, I opened it. In the email, she begged me to come home, claiming she was losing her mind without me. She wrote about how she loved me, how she wanted to fix things for the boys, and how she couldn't understand why I was being so distant. It was all so calculated. Like she knew exactly what to say to pull me back. But then, at the very bottom of the email, was a line that sent chills down my spine. "I promise, Shane, everything will be better soon. Just come home, and we can talk." The next day, Detective Hayes called me in for an update. They had tapped her phone, and what they found confirmed my worst fears. Kay and Greg had spoken several times since I left, and their conversations were chilling. They talked about timing and opportunities, and made cryptic references to my sudden disappearance. Greg even joked, "He's making it easier for us, isn't he?" But the most damning part came when Kay said, "We just need to make it look like an accident. It has to be clean, Greg. No loose ends." My stomach churned. I felt like I was living in some twisted crime drama. How could the woman I'd loved for over a decade be plotting something so sinister? The police needed more. They wanted to catch Kay and Greg in the act, but that meant setting a trap, and I was the bait. "You'd have to go back home," Hayes explained. "Act normal, like you're giving her a chance to explain. If she and Greg make a move, we'll be ready." The idea terrified me. But what choice did I have? If I didn't do this, they might go after someone else, maybe even the boys. I couldn't let that happen. That night, I packed a bag and prepared to return home. Jason tried to talk me out of it, but I was resolute. "I need to protect my kids," I told him. "Whatever it takes." When I walked through the door, Kay was waiting. She looked relieved and rushed to hug me, but I stepped back. "We need to talk," I said coldly. Her face fell, but she quickly recovered, putting on her best concerned wife act. "Shane, I've been so worried. Where have you been?" "Away," I said. "Thinking. But I need answers, Kay. About everything." She hesitated, glancing at her phone on the counter. "Can we talk later? I need to pick up the boys from school." I nodded, watching her carefully. "Sure. We'll talk tonight." As she grabbed her keys and left, I noticed her phone buzzing. A text popped up from Greg. "Is he back? Call me when you can." Kay came back that evening with the boys, acting like everything was fine. She hugged them, chatted about their day, and even cooked dinner, her way of playing the perfect wife. But I couldn't shake the cold knot in my stomach, knowing what she and Greg were planning. I played along, smiling at the kids, laughing when Dylan told a joke, but every second I felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. Kay barely looked at me during dinner, which made it easier to avoid talking about the elephant in the room. Once the boys were asleep, I braced myself. It was time to confront her. Kay was in the kitchen, sipping wine when I walked in. She smiled like nothing was wrong, but her eyes flickered with unease. So, I started, leaning against the counter. "You wanted to talk?" Her smile faltered. "I don't even know where to start, Shane. You just left." I've been losing my mind trying to figure out what's going on. Don't, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't play the victim, Kay. I know. She froze, the glass trembling slightly in her hand. Know what? About you and Greg. Her face drained of color. For a second, she looked genuinely stunned, but then she recovered, shaking her head. Shane, what are you talking about? Greg's just a friend. Stop lying. I snapped, slamming my hand on the counter. I've seen the emails, the texts. I know everything. So don't stand there and insult me with more lies. Her mouth opened and closed, like she was searching for the right words. Then, to my disbelief, she started crying. It's not what you think, she sobbed. Greg and it was a mistake. I was lonely, and he was there, but it didn't mean anything. I swear, Shane, it's over. I wanted to believe her. I wanted so badly for this to be just a stupid affair. But I knew better. Really? I said, crossing my arms. Then what's this? I pulled out my phone and showed her the messages the police had found. Her eyes widened, darting between me and the screen. You've been spying on me, she hissed, her tears vanishing in an instant. You're planning to kill me, Kay. I shot back. You and Greg. Don't act like you're the victim here. She stared at me, her face twisting into something cold and unfamiliar. You're paranoid, she said flatly. I don't know where you got that, but it's not true. Then why does Greg think I'm making it easier for you? Why did you say, it has to be clean, no loose ends? I leaned closer, lowering my voice. What were you planning, Kay? An accident? A robbery gone wrong? Her composure cracked. You don't understand, she blurted, her voice breaking. You think this is all my fault? You're the one who's been distant, who's made me feel like nothing. Greg, he made me feel alive again. And yes, we talked about things, but we never meant to hurt you. It was just talk. I didn't believe her for a second. Talk doesn't include wills and life insurance policies, Kay. You're in this up to your neck. She glared at me, her tears drying. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Always the good guy, the martyr. But you don't know what it's like to live with someone who makes you feel invisible. Her words hit like a slap, but I wasn't about to let her manipulate me. You want to talk about feeling invisible? I've given you everything, Kay. I built this life for you and the boys. And this is how you repay me. She didn't respond, just stood there, her jaw clenched. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You're going to pack a bag and leave. I'll deal with the boys. You're not setting foot in this house again until this is sorted out. You can't do that, she said, her voice shaking. This is my house too. Not anymore, I said. Not after this. She didn't leave quietly. There were more tears, more shouting, but in the end, she packed a bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I locked it and leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. I knew this was far from over. But at least for now, I had taken the first step to protect myself and my boys. After Kay stormed out, the house was eerily quiet. The boys were still asleep, oblivious to the chaos brewing in their lives. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the front door, half expecting Kay to come back and start another argument. But she didn't. The next morning, I called Jason to let him know what happened. She's gone, I told him. For now. For now. Jason asked, his tone laced with concern. Shane, this woman plotted against you. You need to take this seriously. I am, I assured him. The police are still monitoring her. But I had to get her out of the house first. Jason sighed. Just be careful, man. She's not going to let this go easily. By midday, Kay started calling. I ignored the first few, but when the texts started flooding in, I couldn't resist reading them. They swung wildly between desperation and anger. Shane, please let me explain. You're ruining everything. If you don't let me see the boys, you'll regret it. That last one sent a chill down my spine. Around 3 p.m., Detective Hayes called with an update. We've intercepted a few calls between Kay and Greg, he said. It seems she's panicking. She's accusing Greg of backing out and leaving her to deal with this on her own. What does that mean for me? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. It means she might get desperate, Hayes warned. You need to stay vigilant. Keep the boys close, and don't engage with her directly. Let us handle it. That night, as I was putting the boys to bed, James asked a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, is Mom mad at you?" I paused, trying to find the right words. "We're just working through some things," I said. "But don't worry, okay? I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine, like he didn't quite believe me. The next few days were a roller coaster. The police continued monitoring Kay, while I tried to keep life as normal as possible for the boys. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Kay's silence wasn't reassuring, it was unnerving. And then it happened. It was a Friday evening. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I peeked through the window and saw Kay stepping out of an unfamiliar black SUV. My heart sank. She walked up to the door and started banging. "Shane, open up," she shouted. I didn't move. Instead, I called Detective Hayes, who told me to stay inside and lock the doors. "We're sending a patrol car," he said. "Do not engage with her." Kay kept banging, shouting loud enough that the boys came downstairs, wide-eyed. "What's going on?" James asked. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Go back to your room." "But it's Mom," Dylan said, his voice trembling. "I know, buddy," I said, gently guiding them back upstairs. "Just stay in your room for now, okay?" As I came back down, Kay had moved to the window, peering inside. "Shane, I know you're in there," she yelled. "You can't keep me out of my own house." I stayed silent, hoping she'd leave before the patrol car arrived. But then she did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and said, "He's not cooperating. You need to come now." I didn't know who she was talking to, but I wasn't about to wait and find out. Minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. Kay stepped back, throwing her hands up dramatically. "He's keeping me from my kids," she shouted as the officers approached. I opened the door, my hands shaking. "She's not supposed to be here," I told them, explaining the situation. One of the officers turned to Kay. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This is a domestic matter, and you're not allowed on the property right now." Kay glared at me, her face twisting in fury. "You can't do this," she spat. "They're my kids too." The officers escorted her back to the SUV, and as she climbed in, she gave me one last look, cold and calculating. "This isn't over, Shane," she said. I believed her. That night, I couldn't sleep. The boys were safe, the house was quiet, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I knew Kay wasn't going to give up. And with Greg in the mix, there was no telling how far she'd go. I had to be ready for anything. The weekend after Kay's unannounced visit felt like a ticking clock. Every moment was laced with tension, as though something was about to explode. The boys seemed to sense it, sticking close to me and asking questions about when their mom would come home. I gave them the same answer every time: soon. She just needs some time to figure things out. But the truth was, I had no idea what Kay's next move would be. Neither did the police. Detective Hayes assured me that they were monitoring her closely, but every time my phone buzzed or I heard a car pull up outside, my heart jumped. Monday morning brought some relief. The boys were back in school, and I had the house to myself. I spent the day catching up on work, trying to push the situation to the back of my mind. But that evening, Hayes called with an update. "Shane, we've intercepted some more messages between Kay and Greg," he said. "It sounds like they're planning something. Greg mentioned meeting her at a storage unit later this week." "What's in the storage unit?" I asked, feeling my stomach drop. "We're not sure yet, but we're going to find out," Hayes said. "We'll stake it out, see what they're up to. If we're lucky, we'll catch them red-handed." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "And what should I do in the meantime?" "Keep your routine. Don't tip her off that you know anything. And stay out of her way." The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Kay hadn't tried to contact me again, which only made me more suspicious. I followed Hayes's advice, going about my day as normally as I could, but inside, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. By Thursday, I was on edge. The police had tracked Kay to the storage unit twice, but they hadn't seen Greg yet. Hayes told me they were planning a larger operation for the weekend, but for now, they were waiting and watching. That evening, as I was putting the boys to bed, James asked me a question that hit me like a punch to the gut. "Dad, is Mom mad at you?" he said softly, his big eyes full of worry. "Nobody," I said, forcing a smile. Mom and I are just trying to figure some stuff out. It's grown-up stuff, but it's going to be okay. Promise? He asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I could keep that promise. I promise. Friday morning, Hayes called me again. We've got movement, he said. Greg was spotted at the storage unit early this morning. We've got a warrant, and we're going to search it tonight. Do you think they're planning something for this weekend? I asked. It's possible, Hayes said. We're going to move fast and get ahead of them. That night, I could barely sit still. Jason came over to keep me company, sensing that I was on the verge of losing it. We sat in the living room, watching a baseball game on mute while my phone sat on the coffee table, waiting for an update. At 10:47 p.m., it buzzed. It was Hayes. We found something, he said, his voice grim. You need to hear this. The storage unit was a treasure trove of evidence. Inside, the police had found a map of my neighborhood, with my house circled in red ink. There were photos of me, Kay, and the boys, some taken from a distance, others up close. And there was a handwritten list labeled Plan B. The list included things like, get him alone, make it look accidental, dispose of evidence. But the worst part was a box they found in the corner of the unit. It contained items I recognized instantly, a pair of gloves, duct tape, and a bottle of what looked like industrial-strength cleaning solution. They weren't just talking about killing me. They were planning every detail. Do you still think I should stay put? I asked Hayes, my voice shaking. No, he said firmly. We're moving you and the boys tonight. Pack a bag, and we'll take you somewhere safe. By midnight, the boys and I were in a hotel room on the other side of town, surrounded by plainclothes officers. James was confused, asking why we had to leave, but I told him it was just a fun little adventure. Dylan, thankfully, was too young to ask many questions. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring out at the empty street, wondering how I'd ended up here. This wasn't just betrayal anymore, this was a nightmare. And I knew it wasn't over yet. The morning after we moved into the hotel, Detective Hayes showed up at my door with more updates. His face was grim, and I could tell something big had happened. We brought Kay in for questioning early this morning, he said, stepping inside. She didn't take it well. What does that mean? I asked, my stomach knotting. She's denying everything, Hayes said. Claims the storage unit isn't hers, that she doesn't know how any of that stuff got there. She's trying to pin it all on Greg. I scoffed. Of course she is. Hayes nodded. The thing is, we have enough evidence to hold her for now. The messages, the surveillance, the storage unit, it all ties her to the plan. But she's not giving up Greg easily. She's protecting him. I clenched my fists. How much more do you need to bring him in? We're close, Hayes assured me. We just need her to slip up. Later that day, I got a call from Kay's lawyer. I didn't even know she'd hired one, but it didn't surprise me. Mr. Dawson, I represent your wife, Kay, the lawyer began. She's deeply distressed by this situation and wants to resolve things amicably. Amicably. I snapped. She was plotting to kill me. What's amicable about that? The lawyer sighed. She denies those allegations. She's willing to agree to a temporary separation and joint custody of the children, provided you drop any legal action against her. I laughed bitterly. She doesn't get to make demands. Tell her I'm filing for full custody, and if she tries to fight me, I'll make sure every piece of evidence against her is public. The lawyer paused, then said, I'll relay your message. That evening, as I sat in the hotel room with the boys, I got another call, this time from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Shane. It was Kay. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. What do you want? I said coldly. I need to talk to you. Please, Shane. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I barked. You and Greg plotted to kill me. You think I'm going to fall for this? Greg lied to me, she blurted. He set this all up. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, Shane, you have to believe me. I paused, my anger simmering just below the surface. You're lying, Kay. And even if you're not, you still chose to cheat, to betray me and our boys. So don't call me again. Talk to your lawyer. Shane, wait. I hung up. That night, Hayes called again. We've got Greg, he said. Picked him up trying to leave town. He had fake IDs and cash on him. Good, I said. What's he saying? Not much yet, but we're pressing him. If he folds, we might be able to get a full confession. And if he implicates Kay, we can lock her up for good. The relief I felt was fleeting. I wanted justice, but more than that, I wanted this nightmare to end. I wanted to protect my boys and move on with my life. The next few days were a whirlwind. Greg cracked under pressure, admitting to the plot and implicating Kay in the process. Between his confession and the evidence from the storage unit, the police had everything they needed to charge both of them. Kay was arrested later that week. Watching her being led out of our house in handcuffs, on the news, no less, was surreal. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but all I felt was sadness. This was the woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, and now she was a stranger. I filed for divorce the next day, along with full custody of the boys. My lawyer assured me I had a strong case, given the circumstances, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Kay wasn't the type to give up without a fight. Meanwhile, Greg's trial was fast-tracked, and he pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Kay, on the other hand, refused to plead, claiming she was manipulated and had no intention of going through with the plan. Her trial was set for later in the year. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe. The danger was over, but the damage was done. My life, my family, everything I thought I knew, it was all gone. But as I watched my boys playing in the hotel room, laughing and chasing each other, I realized something: we were still standing. And no matter how much Kay had taken from me, she couldn't take that. The weeks after Kay's arrest were a blur of legal meetings, custody arrangements, and trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy for the boys. Every day felt like a battle to stay focused. I was their rock now, and I couldn't let them see how shattered I really was. One morning, as I dropped James and Dylan off at school, James clung to me a little longer than usual. "Dad," he said softly, "is Mom in trouble?" I knelt down, looking him in the eye. "Mom made some bad choices," I said carefully. "But the police are helping sort it out. It's going to be okay." "Does she still love us?" he asked, his voice trembling. I swallowed hard. "Of course she does. She'll always love you. That'll never change." He nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. It broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't shield them from everything. The best I could do was be there for them, no matter what. That evening, my lawyer called with an update. "Shane, the custody hearing is in 3 weeks. Based on the evidence and her charges, I'm confident you'll get full custody. But be prepared, her lawyer might try to paint you as unstable." "Unstable?" I repeated, incredulous. "She's the one who plotted to kill me." "True, but custody battles can get nasty. Just keep your head down, stay out of trouble, and we'll let the evidence speak for itself." I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and dread. The idea of facing Kay in court made my stomach churn, but I knew I had to fight for the boys. They deserved stability, and I was determined to give it to them. 2 days before the hearing, I got an unexpected call from Kay's parents. We hadn't spoken since her arrest, and I wasn't sure what to expect. "Shane," her mother began, her voice strained, "we want you to know how sorry we are for everything that's happened." I didn't know how to respond. They'd always been kind to me, but now their daughter was at the center of this nightmare. "We had no idea what Kay was involved in," she continued. "This isn't the person we raised. We're so ashamed." I took a deep breath. I appreciate that. I really do. But my focus is on the boys right now. They need stability, and I'm not sure Kay can give that to them anymore. Her father chimed in. "We understand. And we support you. Whatever happens, we're here for James and Dylan." Hearing that brought a wave of relief. At least I wasn't fighting this battle alone. The custody hearing was brutal. Kay's lawyer tried to frame me as controlling and paranoid, suggesting that I'd overreacted and driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. But the evidence was overwhelming: Greg's confession, the storage unit, the messages, and the judge wasn't buying their narrative. By the end of the day, the decision was clear. I was granted full custody, with Kay allowed supervised visitation once her legal issues were resolved. When the ruling was read, Kay broke down in tears. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, as I tucked the boys into bed, James hugged me tightly. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" he asked. I smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "Yeah, buddy. We're going to be just fine." And for the first time in months, I believed it. Life slowly started to settle into a routine after the custody ruling. The boys were adjusting to the new normal, and while they asked about Kay from time to time, they seemed to understand that things were different now. I focused on creating a safe, stable environment for them, something they could count on. One evening, Dylan brought me a drawing he'd made at school. It was a picture of the three of us, him, James, and me, smiling in front of our house. Above us, he'd written in big letters, "Me and my dad." "Do you like it?" he asked, beaming. "I love it, buddy," I said, choking back tears. "I'm putting this on the fridge right now." Moments like that reminded me of what I was fighting for. No matter how messy things got, the boys were my reason to keep going. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Kay continued. She remained adamant that she'd been manipulated by Greg, but her claims fell flat in the face of the evidence. Her trial was scheduled for a few months out, and for now, she was stuck in limbo. She tried reaching out a few times, letters, calls through her lawyer, but I kept my distance. My priority was protecting the boys, not reopening old wounds. One Saturday, Jason and his wife Emma invited us over for a barbecue. It was the first time in a while that I felt like myself again, laughing and joking around with friends. The boys played with Jason's kids, their laughter filling the backyard. As I watched them, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The weeks turned into months, and though the pain of Kay's betrayal still lingered, life began to feel lighter. The boys were thriving at school, and our little routines, movie nights, pancake Sundays, trips to the park, became the foundation of our new normal. One evening, while picking the boys up from soccer practice, I ran into a woman I'd seen around the field a few times. She was chatting with one of the coaches when Dylan bolted over, dragging me toward her. "Dad, this is Ms. Rachel. She helps coach sometimes," he said, grinning. Rachel turned, offering a warm smile. "Hi, you must be Dylan's dad. I'm Rachel. My daughter, Sophie, is on the team." We shook hands, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something. We made small talk for a few minutes before she had to leave, but as she walked away, Dylan nudged me. "She's nice, huh?" he said with a mischievous grin. I laughed, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, she seems nice." Over the next few weeks, I saw Rachel more often at practices and games. We'd chat while watching the kids, and I learned she was a single mom, recently divorced. She was kind, funny, and down-to-earth, the kind of person who made you feel at ease just by being around her. One evening, after the kids' game, she caught me as I was loading the boys into the car. "Hey Shane," she said, looking a little nervous. "I was wondering, would you like to grab coffee sometime? Just us." I froze for a moment, caught off guard. It had been so long since I'd even thought about dating, and part of me wasn't sure if I was ready. But another part of me, the part that was tired of feeling stuck in the past, knew I had to take a step forward. "Yeah," I said finally, smiling. "I'd like that." That night, as I tucked the boys into bed, James asked, "Dad, are you happy?" I paused, thinking about Rachel's smile, the sound of the boys laughing, and the peace I was starting to feel. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "I think I'm getting there." Rachel and I met for coffee the following Saturday. It was the first time in years I'd sat across from someone without the weight of a crumbling marriage or looming betrayal hanging over me. We talked about everything: our kids, work, life after divorce. "I'll admit," she said with a small laugh, stirring her coffee, "it's been hard to trust again. But I guess you just take it one day at a time." "Yeah," I agreed, nodding. "That's what I'm trying to do too." Her honesty was refreshing, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to keep my guard up. We started seeing each other more often, coffee dates after work, taking the kids to the park together, even cheering side by side at soccer games. The boys adored Sophie, and the four of them got along like they'd been friends forever. One evening, after a long day, Rachel and I sat on a bench at the park, watching the kids chase each other around. "Shane," she said softly, "do you ever think about starting over?" I glanced at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, finding happiness again. Letting yourself have it." I thought about her question for a long moment. "I do," I said finally. "But I think it's something you have to build. It doesn't just happen." She smiled, reaching over to place her hand on mine. "Well, maybe we can build it together." For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost: hope for a future I could actually look forward to. Rachel and I didn't rush things. After everything I'd been through, and knowing she had her own history to heal from, we agreed to take it slow. But even at a cautious pace, we quickly became a team, not just for each other but for the kids too. One weekend, we decided to take all 4 kids to a local hiking trail. It was nothing too strenuous, just a short path with a waterfall at the end. The boys raced ahead with Sophie, laughing and shouting, while Rachel and I walked behind, carrying snacks and water bottles. "This feels normal," I said, smiling as I watched the kids climb over rocks. Rachel nodded. "It does. It feels good." When we reached the waterfall, Dylan tugged on my arm. "Dad, take a picture. All of us." I handed Rachel my phone and knelt down with the kids. "All right, everyone smile." She snapped a few photos, and when I looked at the screen later, something in me shifted. The image of all of us together, laughing and happy, it didn't feel forced or temporary. It felt real. The boys started asking about Rachel more and more. "Is Ms. Rachel your girlfriend?" James asked one night as I tucked him in. "What makes you think that?" I teased, trying to play it cool. He shrugged. "You smile a lot when she's around. And she's nice. I like her." "Me too, buddy," I admitted. "But we're just taking things slow. You okay with that?" James nodded, grinning. "Yeah. I think it's good." Meanwhile, Kay's trial date loomed closer. Though I'd done everything to shield the boys from the details, they weren't completely in the dark. Kay sent letters from jail, which I read first to make sure they were appropriate. Most were filled with apologies and promises to do better, but I never showed the boys the ones where she blamed me for everything. I debated whether to let them respond. Part of me wanted to protect them from any more of her manipulation, but another part of me knew they'd want to decide for themselves someday. One night, after dinner with Rachel and the kids, she stayed behind to help clean up. As we stood side by side at the sink, she glanced at me and said, "You're doing an amazing job, Shane. The boys are lucky to have you." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thanks," I said. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you." She smiled, then reached up to kiss my cheek. It wasn't rushed or uncertain, it was steady, like everything she'd been for me since the day we met. The weeks leading up to Kay's trial were tense but manageable. The boys were thriving, and my relationship with Rachel had become a steady source of support. Still, the weight of what was coming loomed large. On the morning of the trial, I dropped the boys off at school like any other day. James hugged me a little longer than usual. "Good luck, Dad," he said quietly. I smiled, ruffled his hair, and told him everything would be okay. At the courthouse, I sat quietly as the prosecution laid out their case against Kay. Seeing her there, confident one moment, tearful the next, stirred a strange mix of emotions. I didn't love her anymore, but there was still sadness. Not for her, but for what she'd thrown away. Greg's testimony sealed her fate. He confessed to the plot in full detail, explaining how they planned to stage an accident to cash in on my life insurance. When asked why Kay went along with it, he shrugged. She said she hated him, wanted a fresh start. Those words cut deep, but I stayed focused. This was about protecting my boys, not dwelling on her betrayal. By the end of the trial, the jury didn't take long to decide. Kay was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to several years in prison. She glanced at me as they led her away, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place: anger, regret, maybe even relief. I didn't look back. That night, as I tucked Dylan into bed, he asked, "Is Mom okay?" "She will be," I said softly. "But right now, she's somewhere where she can think about what she did and work on being better." He nodded, hugging his stuffed animal tightly. "I hope she gets better." "Me too, buddy," I said, kissing his forehead.